Yeah. So, okay, probably, I can start for the sake of recorders. Watching people. So welcome everyone for this session on how to ace your vulnerability management program, right from getting the policy right to practicing a much mature program. So we'll cover different aspects of it, how to write policy and how to build these things and build a program inside your company. So let's get into the talk. Brief about me. I've been in the industry for almost 20 years now, come June, July-ish. Priorly worked at Cisco, Alcatel-Lucent, and CDOT in numerous different roles, predominantly in security itself. Got my PhD from IIIT Bangalore in privacy preserving threat intelligence. I'm also co-inventor of around 5 US patents in cloud and cryptography and areas. Also co-author of 3 IETF drafts in the areas of SDN and NFV. Right. I'm also a trusted security advisor for companies in numerous domains: fintech, edtech, IT-enabled services, IT domain also. Published over a dozen papers in IEEE and other conferences. Currently, I'm the CTO, CISO, and also the co-founder at Seconize, where we build this cutting-edge, fully automated risk and compliance management products. Okay. So about this talk is about different layers of vulnerability management itself, starting from getting the definitions right. Some of the examples, we also see some, scenarios as well, and what should be the goal of a vulnerability management program. Is it like a pure ritual? I'm sorry to use the word ritual, but sometimes if you are just following certain things without a proper goals and metrics in place, it just becomes a ritual. What are the different myths? What are the different problems? There are numerous of them. And what is the solution direction? Towards the end, I'll try and kind of give you a reference architecture and also some guidance on how to get everything together. We'll also, by the way, look into the metrics, what kind of a metrics you need to track and how do you track your maturity of this program itself, right? So before I go to the next slide, right? Quick question for all of you. Feel free to put it on chat or in either way, right? Do you do security assessments at all? Is that a stupid question, or it's common sense, right? We all do security assessments, or we don't. Feel free to answer. I don't know if I can have a poll or something here, but if you are allowed, feel free to type and answer, right? So I'm assuming some kind of a security assessments are done in your org, in your roles. Whether it is okay, feel free to answer it later to me, probably. Whether it is security assessments like VAPD scans, as granular as VAPD scans, or risk assessments, or some kind of a compliance audits, or red teaming exercises, right? Or if you're a little bit mature organization, probably you have a vulnerability management scanner brought and probably some agents deployed and things like that, right? So it's like a spectrum, I would say. There are companies I've seen, fast-growing startups who are focusing on the business, which they should be doing ideally, and they do not have yet kind of a vulnerability management program yet, to mature organizations where they have deployed agents or agentless based vulnerability scanning tools, and they're kind of doing it regularly, right? There's a full spectrum of companies, right? So what's the goal? What's the goal of doing all this? What's the goal of doing these scans and assessments and things like that, right? So the numero uno, the number one goal, or the only goal, I would say, this is the challenges I was talking about, or let's take a minute before going into the goal itself, is the challenges of the security assessment, wherein whoever has gone through these assessments know very well that either they are point-in-time assessments in the sense that you onboard a third-party a company to come and do your VAPT assessments in some shape or form, given the scope and budgets and timelines and reasons why you want to get it done. I know the reasons are important as well. What happens typically is that either they're point-in-time assessments or they're deeply technical assessment. I've seen a CIO of a hospital, of some NGO hospital, it is deep south, was extremely worried about his hospital because it's serving a lot of customers and their data is there and he's responsible for that. And he got an assessment done. And in fact, this is a real conversation we had, at least I had many years ago, that he wanted to get the sense of risk, but all he got is a spreadsheet of probably some header missing in a particular web portal, or probably there is some setting that is wrong, and such like. The point I'm trying to make is that these assessments get deeply technical, that it's extremely difficult for people to understand them in their context, in their language, so that they can act upon it. So what happens, either the spreadsheets lie in the inbox itself, or the CIO would have forwarded that email to the IT a person who takes care of the systems and patching and things like that, and there ends the story, right? So that is another problem. Another angle or another way of doing is that I've seen the audits, the risk-based audits, which are not really the VAPT scans as such, but you get in. I mean, that's needed either for compliance reasons or similar regulatory reasons. That there is an audit performed. There is a spreadsheet of the threats identification, and I mean, I'm glad that most of you are in the ISACA, so you are in this domain. So very well, there is a lot of material around how to do the risk assessments itself. You identify the threats, you identify if there are any controls, or if there are no controls, and they kind of do a gap assessment and then fill a spreadsheet saying that, hey, this is your threat, and then this is your risk, and if you do certain things, the risk will come down. It's purely a spreadsheet-driven exercise in theory, and where you kind of maintain it as a risk register of sort for your compliance and audit reasons and things like that. That's another kind of a risk assessment that is done, right? Which kind of detaches itself from the ground reality, because it's purely driven in a theoretical exercise, and again, you may end up getting a list of risks, and then you kind of either you accept the risk or you do some small sporadic projects here and there to bring the risk down, right? So that's another problem with the current risk assessments that are there. Now, on top of this, the IT environment itself is hugely getting complex, right? Any of your organization, you could see that there are some assets on the premise, there are some assets on the cloud, there are some applications run by the vendor in their data center. Some employees are working from home, either before pandemic or after pandemic. Given this diverse and complex IT infrastructure, doing the risk management is also another getting extremely challenging, right? Because of all these layers that I was talking about. Point-in-time assessments, deeply technical in nature, which are very difficult for the executives to understand. Manually doing, of course, nothing wrong, again, in the sense that these activities are being done for a reason, but are they giving the right ROI is what we should be challenging, right? So the repercussion of all these challenges is that either the organization is going blind for the ongoing risks, and probably 90% of the board members cannot interpret what we're talking about. Either the IT teams or the CIOs or the CISOs going to the board members and saying that, hey, I need this budget for ABCD reasons, but not able to justify why they need it, what the risk is, right? And such like. So these are all the current challenges in the security assessment spectrum itself. That's the reason why I've asked this question on how many of you in this audience have either part of some kind of security assessment, or you do these security assessments for your organizations or for your clients and customers, right? So these are all the challenges that exist, right? And as a repercussion, companies continue to go through cyber attacks. The cost of breach globally, of course, 4 million is the average cost of breach that is growing. And all said and done, again, there's a huge shortage of people who are skilled people who can do this security assessments and things like that, right? So let's take a few steps back. Why are we doing these risk assessments? Why are we doing these security assessments, right? It might, for the audience, at least in this room, it might look like no-brainer. I mean, see, it's risk, right? End of the day, you could experience a ransomware attack, or you could experience a data breach or disruption of your operations, or whatever is that, or reputational loss, or whatever is that consequence of not doing this, right? So that is exactly where getting the vulnerability management program right is of high importance. And the only goal of vulnerability management program is to de-risk your organization from cyber threats. That's it, simple as in one sentence. If you ever are interested to build this program, or if you are part of a team that is doing this vulnerability management program, always bear in mind that the only reason why they're doing this, because sometimes if we lose the purpose, if we lose the sense of the purpose, it may become a mere ritual of sort, right? And we are here, we are like professionals, right? We are here to add positive value to the organizations that we are involved in, rather than just doing merely for the sake of filling in some forms and such like, right? Now, what is the term de-risking? That's important again too. So the goal is that to de-risk your organization from cyber threats. Now, the threats could be any of these that I've just discussed. It could be your ransomware attacks, it could be your data breaches, it could be your disruption of operations, it could be your reputational loss, any of those cyber threats. So there's a very beautiful document by ENISA. You just Google around. I mean, I have this habit of giving numerous references throughout my talk. Just Google around later. European National International Security Agency, ENISA, has this well-defined, I think it's available as a spreadsheet as well, all the threats, right? There are numerous threats that are publicly published and well-defined. So your goal is, if you're setting up a vulnerability management program, your only goal is to de-risk your organization. Now, what is the term de-risk, right? Now, de-risk is the term, again, it's a definition, a dictionary term, is that taking steps to make something less risky and less likely to involve in a financial loss. It could be as simple as probably you should go exercise to reduce your risk of some kind of diseases, right? Or it's about saving some money to have a good retired life, right? Or it could be fixing your vulnerabilities, right? I mean, just trying to draw analogies, or it's about having good practices within the organization so that your organization is less likely to involve financial loss, right? So a single statement to de-risk your organization from cyber threats is the goal of vulnerability management. Okay, and we also briefly touched upon the term de-risk itself, which is very, very crucial here in order to get the definition right? So now comes the question of what is risk itself. Now you may ask, like, say, hey, this is so stupid. What do you mean by what is risk? Risk is risk, right? But that doesn't make sense. We are all, I think most of you in this call are engineers, right? So as engineers, we want to get our definitions right. Okay, so before that, let's try to demystify the term risk itself. What is it? What it is not. Now, I've spoken to numerous people in my 20 years of career, and at least in the last 6 to 7 years, I've been talking to many people in the cybersecurity as a part of my professional life, and try to ask simple questions. These are students, these are early career engineers, these are cybersecurity specialists, these are CIOs, these are CISOs, numerous, right? And they struggle, unfortunately or fortunately, they struggle to differentiate the term, what is a threat, what is a vulnerability, what is a risk, and what is a control, right? In our domain, it's extremely difficult to get these words right for whatever reasons. So it's very important on us to get these definitions right. Okay, so before going further, let's demystify the term risk itself, what it is and what it is not, right? First, let us see what it is not. And some of you may even challenge me in this call or later as well, saying that why certain things I'm saying is not a risk, but let me clarify all of those that I've put in this slide. Okay, existence of a vulnerability. It is not a risk. Be extremely careful of when we are articulating risk to your executives and your managers and things like that, right? Mere existence of a vulnerability is not a risk, right? There could be a log4j, there could be a SQL injection. It is not yet a risk. It is still a vulnerability. Okay. It depends on when does it turn into risk. We'll see the examples shortly, but mere presence of a vulnerability, it could be SQL injection, it could be missing logbook before your data center's entrance, or these all could be vulnerabilities, but they're not risks yet. Okay, absence of a control. Now I've seen many cases where they think, oh, there is no antivirus on it, or you have not deployed latest and greatest sandboxing technology, or you have not deployed a DLP solution, so it is a risk, right? So absence of a control, a mere control, is not a risk yet. Okay, so presence of indicator of compromise, or of late people are talking about indicator of attack as well, right? So presence of mere indicator of compromise, probably you have a probably there's a laptop that is speaking to an IP address with a bad reputation. Probably you have found a file hash that's known to be malware. Probably you have reached out a URL. One of your employees or your colleagues have reached out to a URL which is known to have served malware. Right? That's mere presence of indicator of compromise. It's not yet a risk. Okay, so, and presence of probable threat actor. Now, almost all of you would have gone through these audits or ISO or something where you would have noticed that this check to do background verifications of people, and probably in one of those or few of those background verifications, you found that somebody has a past history, past criminal history, right? But that is not yet a risk, right? Presence of a probable threat actor is not yet a risk. Okay, and a broken process, or probably there's no process at all. Okay, now how often you patch your systems, and how often you patch your what's the process of getting an approval for a password or buying a tool or whatever is that process, right? A broken process or lack of process is also not a risk yet, right? And absence of a formal policy. I've seen companies saying that, hey, you don't have a third-party risk management formal policy, it's a risk. Or you don't have a social media policy, it's a risk, right? It is not. Okay, now it might sound controversial, so just hold on your breath until I explain why. Yes, I'm coming there, Basuraj, that why it is not a risk, right? So intentionally, I have packed a lot of words here. So I have used the word vulnerability, I have used the word control, I've used the word phrase indicator of compromise, I've used the phrase threat actor, I've used the phrase broken process and a formal policy and things like that. The reason I'm saying this is not yet a risk is that first let us understand the definitions of what these mean, right? Let's understand what these definitions are purely from an academic sense, but that's very much needed. As I've said, many people still struggle to differentiate between what is a vulnerability, what is a threat, and how to articulate risk, right? I'll answer all these questions in the next few minutes, right? So let's quickly see a few definitions. It's important for us while talking with our peers or with our executives as well on getting these definitions right. A vulnerability is a weakness. For example, in an information security, in an information system, probably your there is lack of encryption on a particular laptop, or rather there's a SQL injection, or there's a CVE, or there's a misconfiguration. Probably there is some S3 bucket that is publicly exposed, right? It's a vulnerability. Now, what is a threat? Right? We have only talked. We've only defined that there's a weakness in an information system, or a security procedure, or an internal control, or a configuration. It's just a weakness still, right? Now, a threat is a likely circumstance or an event where somebody is going to, in a simplistic term, it has an adverse effect if something goes wrong. For example, denial of service is a threat. Now, denial of service can manifest itself in different ways due to different vulnerabilities, right? So it's a threat. Ransomware is a threat. It's not a vulnerability. Phishing is a threat. Data breach is a threat. Espionage is a threat. Outage is a threat. Theft of a physical device is a threat, right? So it is a circumstance in which there is an adverse impact on the organization. There is some kind of a loss or kind of an impact. That is a threat. Okay, so vulnerability is a weakness. Threat, if at all it manifests, right? It has an adverse impact on the organization. Okay, now let's move on. There are a couple of more definitions, and then we'll see some more examples. Now, who is a threat actor? A threat actor it could be an individual. It could be a group of individuals that can manifest a threat to the organization. Okay, so it could be a disgruntled employee. We have seen numerous cases, like say some employee of a large organization quit for whatever reasons. He was unhappy, and while going, he took a list of intellectual property. That's a disgruntled employee. Or probably he's still inside, but he's kind of selling the data to a competitor, right? So these are disgruntled employees. These are threat actors, right? Cyber criminals or competitors. Yes, sometimes for competitors are also threat actors. Nation state actors, vendors. These are all could be threat actors. These are still an individual or a group of individuals that can manifest a threat, that can manifest an occurrence or a circumstances where it can have an adverse impact on the organization, right? So what is an impact? An impact on our organization in terms of financial or reputational losses. It could be loss of productivity, it could be revenue loss, it could be cost of investigations. Somebody asked me, what is a big deal if credit cards information is leaked for a particular bank, right? So there's cost of investigation, there's a cost of PR, there's a cost of replacement of these cards. These are apart from the financial losses if some fraudsters are misusing those numbers, right? And loss of course, brand reputation as well, right? So these are some of the definitions. I guarantee you this is the last slide on the definitions, right? Control. It could be a technical or a non-technical information. Information asset or of sort that exists to remediate or mitigate a potential impact. It could be your antiviruses, it could be your firewalls, it could be SIEM, it could be policies, it could be trainings. These are all your controls, right? And a well-written policies are also a good control, first line of defense. Now, what is risk? Right? We have seen what is a vulnerability, it's a weakness. We have seen what is a threat. It is an occurrence or a circumstance which could likely have an impact on the organization. We have seen who is a threat actor, a group or individual group of people, an individual or a group of people. We have seen what is an impact, likely losses. We have seen what is control. Now, I've used 5 terms here, and the last one is the risk. Now, cyber risk is the likelihood of a threat's occurrence. Okay, understand carefully. It's a likelihood of a threat occurrence. It is not a risk if the attack has already happened. Risk is always a likelihood, that is something going wrong, a likelihood of an earthquake, likelihood of floods, likelihood of a tsunami, a likelihood of a cyber threat. It is a likelihood. We don't call it a risk if it has already happened. No, it is likelihood. It's a probability, right? By a threat actor, resulting in an adverse impact after exploiting a vulnerability. That's extremely important to contextualize all your findings in your assessments in some such way, right? Now, it should be very clear that, hey, there is a 90% likelihood of a cyber criminal exploiting a SQL injection on a website resulting in loss of data. This is a well-articulated risk, right? There's a beautiful resource I often refer on ISACA website on how do you write risk statements, right? So this is this particular example has elements of that risk statement. Now, if you go back to the examples I've mentioned, a mere presence of SQL injection on a website is not a risk, because this always happens, folks. I mean, I've seen numerous of our customers and my professional peers and friends saying that, hey, somebody scanned my website, comes to me and says that, hey, there is a SQL injection, you need to pay me something, right? And what happens internally? Oh, I've seen that it's a marketing website, there isn't much customer data in it, it's not much risk, you just put it in your spam folder, that's fine. Or somebody finds that, hey, there is a crypto weakness in your certificate in the website that I've scanned and found out. Please, give me something, right? Of late, it's not bug bounty. There's a phrase for that. It's beg bounty, right? So never ever do that. I highly discourage people to just scan and go to the organization, and it's basically inducing FUD, I mean, fear, uncertainty, and doubt and things. It's not good as such, right? If there's a proper bug bounty program, please participate in it, but just don't do the script kiddie business of scanning random website and scaring them off, right? Now, coming back to that example, just because you have found a vulnerability, it doesn't mean a risk yet, because there should be an exploit code available. It should be exploitable. It should result in a loss of some sort. It could be loss of data. It could be reputational loss. It could be bringing down the website or some sort. Only then it is a risk. I hope it's making sense now why I have said that presence of a vulnerability is not a risk. Probably it's just a read-only blog. Probably if somebody's running a WordPress marketing website, and even if it is down for some time, or if there is somebody hacks it and puts a message saying that this website has been hacked, it's maybe not a big deal for them. The moment IT administrator sees that, they just reset it from a backup or something like that. It's just noise and minor inconvenience, but it's not just a risk. You can't claim that a risk, right? So absence of a control, for example, you don't have information security policy, it's okay. Maybe there's a good security culture in the organization. That's the reason why there's a less likelihood of some cyber event happening, although there is no policy. You're seeing the difference now. Absence of a control is okay in a particular context. Presence of an indicator of compromise. Probably there's a laptop given to an intern. Probably doesn't have much access to any of the systems. Even if he downloaded some file which is like a crypto mining thing that runs in his laptop, it's okay. I mean, presence of indicator of compromise, it's okay, right? Because the lack of this contextualization is where the the vulnerability analysts struggle all the time to get their attention on which ones matter, right? We'll cover these. I have numerous different ways of explaining the elephant in the room. We'll cover that. But for these reasons, you can't yet call it a risk. You can't still get the attention enough needed to get that fixed. Okay, so these are the basic definitions. I have some Q&A. Let me quickly check it if I can answer now. But let's you don't have EDR on your 20% test yet. That's a risk, right? Rachna, that's a good question again, right? Yeah, I think there's an anonymous attendee found out a small bug in the definition. You're right. I'll correct it. It's a technical measure rather than information. I mean, yeah, that's right. Right. And Rachna, your question is that, but let's say you don't have an EDR on your 20% estate. That's a risk, right? Now it depends again in the sense that, see, it's always about trade-off, right? I've seen. I've seen people taking conscious decisions of not able to roll out on all their 100% of devices. Maybe there is a 20% of devices which some back office users, which is not connected to the internet, and sort. It is okay to not have an EDR on it, right? Either for cost reasons or simply the reason that they're never connected to internet, or no one uses that outside their systems and such like. There could be rational reasons for not calling that a risk. Hope that answers answers your question, and keep them coming. I mean, I'll be more than happy to answer these questions, right? So coming back, contextualizing of this information, into something like either a probability or the dollar value or a score or something that considers all these factors is a risk. Okay, so now let's see a couple of examples of what is a risk, so that gives you a better idea or a sense of what this risk is itself, right? So cyber risk is again likelihood of a threat occurrence by a threat actor resulting in an adverse impact after exploiting a vulnerability. So you may have a vulnerability, but what if there is no exploit available? You may have an exploit, but what if there is no known threat actor exploiting that vulnerability? Maybe it is just a theoretical exploit that is present in some research paper, right? Probably there is an exploit available and a threat actor, but maybe you have a defense in place, right? So all these things need to be considered in order to qualify that to be a risk, right? Now, high-level examples could be, say, 90% likelihood of a cyber criminal exploiting a SQL injection on a website that might result in some kind of data, or an estimated 10 million likely loss of revenue due to a disgruntled employee stealing intellectual property from a file server over the next 1 year. Right? See the context that we need to bring in our risk assessments. Estimated 12 hours downtime due to an untrained employee. Untrained employee is also a threat actor. We are not really, innocence is also a threat, right? It's not that always people try to do nefarious things. Untrained employee clicking on a phishing email that might result in disruption operations is also, untrained employee is also a threat actor, right? So now it might be difficult to get this kind of numbers in place. There are numerous models evolving for it. Probably we'll do a completely different session on risk quantification itself. But this talk is about vulnerability management. This talk is about the goal again. The goal of vulnerability management is to de-risk your organization, right? So we'll have probably, in the future, we'll have a separate call on how do you calculate this, these losses, these estimates and things like that. But there are simpler models to calculate your likelihood and stuff, right? We'll briefly touch upon some of these topics in this session itself. Okay, so I hope, can I get rid of this? Sorry, can I get rid of this top one? That's okay if it's not hurting. Can you see this start with policy, the heading, or anyone knows how to get rid of? Sorry.
We are able to see that. I don't know.
Okay, then fine. I think I'm only seeing that bar that comes saying that sharing, sort of. That's fine, right?
I'm able to see start with policy.
Yeah, good, perfect, right? So where do you start again, right? Where do you start with de-risking your organization again, right? Now, be wary that whenever you're doing an audits, whenever you're trying to do an assessments, or scanning the tools or things like that, all the challenges that we have discussed, right? I mean, they are deeply technical in nature. It's difficult to articulate to the executives, or it is even difficult to articulate to the teams who have to mitigate them also, right? We'll cover those aspects, right? So where do you start, right? Start with the policy. Why start with the policy, right? What are policies? I'm sure most of you have heard of what is a policy, but almost always, for whatever reasons, policies do exist in your organization, especially for compliance reasons, or really companies care for having a mature processes. That's the reason why they have policies, or for compliance and regulatory reasons as well, which almost all the employees needs to adhere. Usually what happens is when these policies are drafted, they go through a committee, either an ISMS committee of sort, where either the CISO gets these policies written by professional policy writers, or he or she with their own experience, probably they have written these policies as well. But more important is that these policies will be getting a blessing from the CEO and the board, that all these employees, they need to be approved, right? Now that's a very powerful weapon, I would say, in case you are trying to champion these vulnerability programs inside your organization, right? So that's the reason starting with policy is very important. Okay, so they're always approved by the executives, approved by the board, that you get enough backing from the management in order for rolling out any programs. Okay, so that's the reason. Okay, there's a question again. Okay, what if it's on cloud estate? I have seen cases when companies lose contract with no EDR in place. Yes, right. Now, if you can quantify saying that if inside the cloud, you will lose a contract, then you have to get it. That's a clear loss, right? That's a compliance risk. You're losing money, so you need to get it, right? So that qualifies to be a risk because there's a loss there. Okay, and that to quantify, right? I mean, saying that hey, you have a 10 million contract that you can lose if you don't have a cloud EDR in place. That's clear risk. Okay. Now coming back to our policy, so getting your policy is right. Now, what does that mean? I mean, I'm not sure how many of you have read these policies or how many of you have written these policies, but a quick policy 101 of what are elements of a good security policy, right? The purpose of the policy should be very, very clear. The scope, objectives, responsibilities, SLAs, and which all compliances they map to. These are bare minimum elements of any security policy. It need not be your vulnerability management policy. It could be your threat management policy. It could be your password policy. It could be your incident management policy, right? These are bare minimum elements that needs to be incorporated. I'll check the questions. The later probably you can hold. I see that there are questions popping up. So these are the bare minimum elements of a security policy. Okay. Now, what does these elements mean in the context of vulnerability management? That let's see. Okay. And I've reviewed more than a dozen vulnerability management policies in numerous companies. And I'm saying this of experience, and I'll cover some of those experiences as well, right? Now, the first problem I've seen is that there are policies written by an external agency. There's nothing wrong in it because writing a policy is also needs an expertise. But sometimes what happens is that there are at least a dozen policies, and in which let's see if it's an important question. I'll cover this, Rachna. Okay. S is support. We only know S. S is support, right? I'll cover this, right? Now, now which policy, right? I've seen companies where there is one document which all the policies are written for simplicity. I've seen companies where you have like more than a dozen policies, and the de-risking concept itself is kind of mentioned sporadically in cyber risk management policy, vulnerability management policy, patch management, remediation, incident response, and numerous different policies. Like it's all over, right? And so depending upon the complexity of your organization, now either they can all be in multiple places, or they can be all in one, for simplicity reasons, one vulnerability management policy. The elements that I'm going to discuss in the next few slides, right? So why I'm trying to emphasize is that often there is a disconnect between what is there in the policy and what is the ground reality, right? Maybe things are not realistic, maybe things are not operationalizable, maybe things are too much in English, but somebody can't take that policy and implement that policy. There could be multiple reasons. A classic example is that you might have a cyber risk management policy which talks about risk assessments, which talks about accepting the risk, transfer the risk, and all that English that we talk about during risk assessments, but it has no connection at all with vulnerability management policy. In fact, vulnerability management policy actually talks about ground risks, right? The vulnerabilities itself, and then what to do with those vulnerabilities and things like that. They don't, I mean, I've not seen where they kind of stitch saying that, hey, the technical vulnerabilities are kind of managed in vulnerability management policy, or the remediations are kind of, so there is no stitching of that happens usually with what I've seen. So that's the reason it's very important to connect all these dots. And again, remember, the goal is that we want to de-risk our organization from cyber threats again, right? So and sometimes even in incident response policy, elements of vulnerabilities come in, like how do you respond to some of these vulnerabilities that are popping up, like zero-day exploits and things like that. So that's what it is, right? So now let us see how do we marry these elements that I've said, like say the purpose, the objectives, the scope and objective, of course, scope and objectives, and things like that in general, which are good elements of any policy. How do we marry that with vulnerability management policy, right? So the purpose is clear when you're, for simplicity's sake, I'm just assuming that we are working on one vulnerability management policy. It can have elements of risk as in the traditional sense, the risk assessments and things like that. So we need to unify everything so that there's one concise place. Of course, you can flesh out these elements in different policies, you can connect the dots, but for the sake of the discussion, the goal is to ensure whatever we are going to discuss in the next few minutes are covered either in one policy or multiple policies, right? So the purpose is very clear in the vulnerability management policy. The sole reason, the sole purpose of that policy is to ensure you are de-risking your organization from cyber threats. It's a single line statement and a very clear statement, right? Now, when you are actually translating that into your scope and objectives, especially when you're writing objectives, the risks, or rather not yet the risk, right? The threats are highly contextual depending upon your organization, right? If you are an e-commerce organization selling some goods on your website, a clear downtime of that website, probably a threat of a DDoS is higher because you may incur, gosh, I don't know if probably Flipkart is down for a few minutes due to a DDoS attack. There could be a PM who could calculate quickly and say, hey, this is a likely loss because, or if Zomato or Swiggy is down for a few hours, they can quickly calculate and say, hey, this is my likely loss due to that, right? So it depends on what industry you are in, what kind of a threat is of higher importance for you. Now, if you speak to manufacturing a kind of organizations, they may say productivity, loss of productivity is of high importance for them. The threat is high importance for them. Now, if you talk about pharmaceutical companies, data breaches of high importance for them, right? If you talk about hospitals, then ransomware is of high importance for them, right? It depends, slightly contextual. It depends upon what organization, what type of business you are into, and what threat is of important and what threat is of relatively lesser important kind of, right? And intellectual property threat, of course, if you're working on a startup and doing some cool stuff, probably your source code theft itself is of high important. Now, the reason, almost all of your risk management frameworks talk about identify threats. So it is the same here as well. You need to identify those threats, sit down with your management, sit down with your CFO probably, and identify what are your threats that might likely result in loss of some kind of losses, and then get them straight into your objective. Your objective is to prevent the threats that you have identified, right? Now, coming to scope, okay? Scope is always about what kind of a coverage that you want to get. Okay, what kind of a coverage you want to get within the scope of your vulnerability management policy. All right, it could be what all type of assets that are coming under risk, right? Either it could be type of assets, it could be the assets themselves, or it could be based on certain classification criteria, right? Let me break that down for you, right? I've seen organizations where VAPT scans are done for externally facing, it's okay, where the scope is only for probably the network devices that are and the website that are publicly exposed. But it's very important to get this scope of the vulnerability management program itself, like probably business critical applications running servers, probably the devices used by executives, probably the laptops used by senior management, or whatever that. Or you could flip the problem rather than by asset types, as in network devices, websites, or assets, as in the actual laptops or the servers and such like. You could also flip the problem and say, hey, do your asset classification that anyway you're planning to do, anyway you'll be doing it for any of your compliance regulatory reasons, and anything that has a classification more than probably 8 out of 10 or 7 out of 10 or whatever is the criteria should be under the purview of your vulnerability management policy, right? Now, we have to be very realistic here. We can't be very idealistic saying that, hey, I want to roll out this program for all my devices, all my assets in the organization. It may be a no-starter because of budgetary resources or whatever other reasons. It may not even fly, right? So we have to be realistic when we come to scoping and of this itself, right? It could be asset classification. And another important thing that always comes is that the people and process related vulnerabilities are missed in the vulnerability management policy. People always talk about what are the technical vulnerabilities? Do we have a scanner or not? Is there an agent installed or not? Are the patches there or not? Or blah, 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 blah. But the people and process related vulnerabilities, what if the employees are not trained? What if the processes are not established for critical processes, right? So those kind of elements also need to come in, right? And when we say a scope, probably we should even talk about baselining, right? In the sense that I mean, in some metric sense, saying that, hey, can we talk about some kind of a baselines established for my devices or for my servers and such like. And you need to tie it down again with your risk appetite. Like, for example, if you have a separate risk management policy, and if it doesn't cover some number of sort risk appetite, what is the minimum, what is the maximum? You need to tie it down with that, because without that, it is very, very difficult to get the fixes or get the SLAs in place. I'll cover the SLAs next, right? So the scope is very, very important. Now, Racy, yes, I think responsible, accountable, supported, consulted, informed, right? I think, yeah, few people, I mean, RACI is more popular, but I've seen RASCI as well. Very important is that we need to get, of course, this is important for any security policy, but for the vulnerability management policy, it's all the more important because I'll tell the reason, right? Almost always, I've seen that you have the scan results in the inbox, if it is a vendor-driven, or you have a very nice fancy dashboard with all the graphs and charts of missing patches and things like that. But who is going to bell the cat? Who is going to be brought to, or who is made accountable for reducing those numbers is almost always missing. That's what I've clearly seen, because it's not clearly mentioned in the policy, right? Who is responsible? Is that it again highly contextual? There is no right or wrong answer. It is more important to find out who is responsible in your organization or in the organization that you're consulting or doing audits for, or you are responsible for running the vulnerability management program, right? Is it the IT team? Is it the InfoSec team? Especially if there is no such team as InfoSec team, probably the IT team itself has one or two resources who will be doing these scans and stuff. But who is responsible for fixing, right? Or even for that matter, who is responsible for scanning, right? Is he the asset owner? Probably there is a business owner who is launching a new publicly facing application that's going to go live. Are they responsible to get these assets scanned, identify the vulnerabilities, fix them, and then only roll out as a public launch, right? So it's extremely important to get who is responsible. Without the RACI matrix for this, I've not seen good results coming from your. The policy might exist. You would have bought some tools for the sake of the tools, but you won't get results intended. The results again being de-risking your organization, right? Intended from this program. Okay, so it's also important to write down saying that, hey, who is accountable for that? Of course, it's not necessarily that in the policy document you mentioned, do we have expertise or not? That's out of purview for that's one of the questions that you should have back of your mind while writing this. But what kind of support you need from management, what kind of support you need from executives, because this is a policy, right? I mean, it needs to be sent for approval, and they need to understand what kind of support you need from them. That is another missing piece. You may say that, hey, we need to do this, we need to scan it every 30 days, we need to patch it every 15 days or whatever. But what is the support you need from management? That's sometimes missing, right? So these are not likely that you put it in the policy document itself, but at least you need to have like a working committee notes or something like that, right? So SLAs, extremely important. A lot of mistakes people do here that makes this whole program fall apart, saying that you deal how to deal with critical high, medium, lows. That might sound like no-brainer, right? I mean, you just put saying that critical needs to be fixed in 5 days, high needs to be put in 10 days, medium needs to be put in whatever, and low needs to be put in, fixed in whatever, right? The numero uno mistake that is done here is that almost always these numbers are unrealistic. And the second reason being you can't have the same SLA for the same for different asset types. Classic examples, right? So we were, I was helping some of the organizations to get their programs right, and then in my role as a virtual CISO for them, then we came up with a policy saying that, hey, criticals needs to be fixed in 5 days, period, done, right? When we rolled out this program, it's impossible to get it because of numerous practical things involved in it, right? The web application fix needs coding effort. If they found out that there is a no multi-factor authentication, which is a critical issue, this is a public facing, customer data is there, multi-factor authentication is not implemented, it's a critical vulnerability, you can't get it in 5 days, period, right? So maybe there's a vendor involved. Maybe the third-party vendor needs to be apprised that there's a new requirement coming. Maybe the engineering team needs to be told that there's a new requirement coming. It's already rolled out, but it's critical. You need to get it fixed. 5 days is impossible, right? But it is possible in certain scenarios. Probably, you have a critical S3 bucket publicly facing. It has some customer data in it, and you need to get it down within 5 days. Yes, realistic. You just go to AWS, find that S3 bucket, turn it off. Probably, if you have a moderate expertise in AWS, you can bring it down in probably half an hour or so, right? So that's the context that is usually missing. So how do you deal with these SLAs for different asset types, right? So you could think of it as a replacing hardware. There's a hardware level bug found in a critical system, and there is no patch available. You need to replacing hardware less than 5 days. Forget about it. It's not going to happen. So you need to be very, very realistic in setting these things. At least you have a workaround. You have alternative mitigating controls. You put additional monitoring or whatever. But fixing them in these impossible SLAs is very difficult, right? And your SLAs should also talk about what is your mean time to remediate. Towards the end of the talk, we'll discuss about metrics given the time during that time. But what is the mean time to remediate for different asset types? It should be explicitly called out. Now, does the vendor contract cover these SLAs? Here, the vendor could be, probably you have outsourced your website development to a third party, and in your contract, have you clearly brought out saying that the vendor is responsible for fixing the vulnerabilities? I've seen numerous times it happens saying that the vendor says, sorry, it was not part of contract. I can't fix these vulnerabilities. You need to additionally pay me or whatever. And that never goes. And these marketing websites or whatever corporate websites are lying there with the vulnerabilities with no one to fix it because the vendor is refusing to do. And changing the vendor contract and going through whole drama, it's like a month's effort, right? So we need to be very, very wary about these kind of issues when coming up with your policies and stuff, compliances, right? And you need to mention that why are we doing this? One is, of course, as I keep saying, there are two types of CISOs. One is where the CISOs are driven by the risk, so they need to ensure all these policies and measures are in place, controls are in place. Two, the CISOs are driven by compliances and regulatory reasons because otherwise they're they are involved for the consequences and stuff, right? So it helps in your policy document saying that, hey, this particular vulnerability management policy maps to probably PCI DSS, probably RBI controls, probably IRDA controls, probably ISO standard or whatever, right? So that helps them, gives them enough assurance when the executives are reviewing and approving, or even when the readers are reading saying that, hey, there's a reason why we need to do this, right? A quick check here. I'm sure many of you would have been familiar with the SCF, the Secure Controls Framework. I've just kept it open for you. I'm not sure if it's quite visible, but you can go ahead and then read about SCF, download this well-written compliance framework spreadsheet where all the domains, I've just filtered the vulnerability and patch management related controls for you. wherein you can see that it gives you neatly on which all standards these controls map to, right? On numerous global and regional compliances. So you're free to check that and use this resource when you're drafting policies or when you're enhancing these policies as such, right? So fantastic resource. I would highly recommend every one of you to go through it in case if you have not done that before. Okay, so now coming back, what are the next steps now that you have a policy in place? Let me quickly check some of the questions. Yes, Rachna, these are nice questions. So should we make policies more achievable? Yes, you need to make it more achievable. I'm going to cover that. What is the critical thing that should be covered when you are developing for your organization? Okay, CBSS score. Please hold on these questions. These are exciting questions. Definitely, I'm going to answer these one at a time throughout the end of through this course of this talk. By the end of this, if you still have questions left, and I promise I'll answer it either in this session or offline, right? So just hold on. All these questions I'm going to cover in one way or the other in the due course of time, right? So coming back, you have these policy steps drafted. Policy drafted with all these elements. Now, what are the next steps? The first step is that be extremely realistic on what is achievable. It's okay that on the day when your policy is not perfect, but it is important. As I say, perfection is the opposite of progress, right? You can't on the day one have an ideal or a perfect policy. It needs a couple of iterations. I've seen policies evolving over 3 or 4 years for organizations where it becomes mature and operationalizable and things like that, right? So be very realistic. If you're starting small, start small. It's okay. Have very simple policy that is achievable. Identify your gaps. You write your policy which is achievable. You have put through your committee to get it approved. The executives have blessed it. Now you have a policy that is approved that you need to start implementing that. Now the first step is of course to identify the gaps, identify the tools, identify the budget. Probably identifying the budget comes after your gaps, because before you choose your tools, probably if you have a lesser budget, you may have to settle down to some open source and free tools. But if you have a little bit moderate to decent budget, you may want to go for commercial tools. Identify the resources, as in if at all you want to buy some tools, where are they going to run? Is it cloud-based? Is it agent-based? And you need servers, you need deployment. Do you have the network architecture to reach these servers to scan them and stuff like that? And also identify whether you have staff for that, right? Always start small, show results. It's extremely important. I've seen the security teams struggle to show the results because executives always want to see some numbers, right? Not necessarily dollar value, but some metrics, some maturity numbers that this program is working, and that you need more time, more resources to operate this at a much mature way. Towards the end of the talk, again, we'll talk about maturity and measurements and things like that, right? And extremely important, always those who are working in security teams, make friends. Only not foes, because see, end of the day, they should not see you, the business teams and the other teams should not see you as a speed breaker in their endeavors, but they should see you as a friend and an ally. So it's very important that you make friends with them. You would see the power of having friends in your other departments can make your programs fly. That's how you influence, right? I mean, sphere influence and the social capital that you build is extremely important in case if you are if you aspire to become a good CISO or a good security manager or security administrator. Always have make friends in different departments that will help you to implement your policy. You should be a person who is approachable and reachable, right? I'll share the links and things like that, right? Now let's go to the more exciting part of how do we bridge, or how do we translate whatever we have discussed in theory to the practice, right? How do we practice these things? Now, there are certain things that we should bear in mind when we are practicing the vulnerability management program. That I will try to cover first before even we go to the solution, right? We should be very, as I said, being pragmatic, being realistic is extremely important for the success of this program. Right now, let's see how do we go from policy to the practice. Right, before we practice or before we implement, before we roll out this program, it's extremely important that you need to understand certain myths of the vulnerability management itself. It's extremely important that what are the certain myths, right? Let's quickly cover that. Now, the first very important myth is that all vulnerabilities are knowable, right? Do not have back of your mind that everything is knowable. That means your scanners can detect or your scripts can detect all kind of vulnerabilities. There is almost always certain things that are not knowable, right? Having that is a thought process which will help you to plan your mitigation and strategies and defenses in place, right? So there is overemphasis, I would say, of late on CVEs because they are extremely, searchable, codifiable, and there is a rating given and things like that. There is an overemphasis on application vulnerabilities. There is overemphasis, I would personally take is that on cloud misconfigurations, because all these three are almost always on the news, right? Cloud misconfigs could be there is a bucket that is externally reachable. There is a EC2 instance that is open for the world, or application vulnerabilities like OWASP. There is nothing wrong with that, I would say. But what I'm trying to say is that don't be overly focused on these three only, because there are so many things that you need to be considering, right? It could be your network misconfigurations, it could be your SaaS and PaaS misconfigurations. I've seen an organization completely cloud native, soon to become a unicorn. 80% of their tech is SaaS. They probably some 20% is running some workloads here and there, but everything is SaaS. I need authentication, get from the SaaS provider. I need storage, get this SaaS provider. I need whatever, everything is SaaS, right? So SaaS and PaaS misconfigurations is another. OS misconfigurations, container misconfigurations, IT/OT gaps in case if you are into SCADA systems and such like. Vendor risks, right? I know of companies where they have a nicely policies implemented and things like that, but the vendors manage their cloud, and the vendors themselves are not compliant, or they don't have good security practices. So vendor risks, unreported vulnerabilities like zero-day exploits, of course, supply chain vulnerabilities, process gaps, people awareness issues, Active Directory misconfigurations, 0 days. So there are many more that you may need to consider. I agree that this is overwhelming. It might create fear that, oh my God, I need to do this much, but there are steps towards. But the first step is knowing that we need to accept the reality that all vulnerabilities are not knowable. So that's the first myth. Okay. So what are the other myths? All vulnerabilities are knowable is a myth. All identified vulnerabilities with known exploits, or let me take one more step, like 1.5, between 1 and 2. All vulnerabilities have exploits, right? So first assume that you don't know all the vulnerabilities. The second myth is that all the vulnerabilities need not have exploits. Then all the vulnerabilities may have exploits, but they're not exploitable because there's some reason behind that, right? So first step is vulnerabilities are not knowable. The second step is vulnerabilities are probably we figured out scanning and all that stuff that there are vulnerabilities, but do you have exploits? Then you may have to cross correlate with exploit databases, GitHub and such like, but there's an exploit or not, that's important. Even if there's an exploit, what if they're not exploitable? Maybe there's a IDS and IPS has a rule which blocks this exploit, right? They maybe are exploitable, they may not be exploitable, right? And another important thing is that all the vulnerabilities are applicable to me or my organization. Please come out of this notion that almost all the vulnerabilities, I know it is very difficult to operationalize this. I'll give you a classic example. There is a vulnerability in a top branded firewall that is abused by a particular group of threat actors to leverage from SWIFT transactions, right? Now, the SWIFT transactions are banking related applications. So maybe the particular firewall make which has this vulnerability, if it is not at least known to be used in threat actors of or the malware campaigns of different types. Maybe you are into hospitality, maybe you are into oil and gas, right? Probably the threat actors are not after these, maybe not, right? So always having back of mind, have a sense of doubt that are these vulnerabilities even applicable to me or my organization, right? All the vulnerabilities of same type should be treated in same way, not necessarily, right? All the vulnerabilities above CVSS 8 are risky. Please get out of this notion. CVSS score is not a risk score. It is a standardized score. It is a vulnerability score. It is not a risk score. Again, go back to the definitions. Vulnerability, threat, risk, the definitions are extremely clear. You can go to the CVSS website itself or quickly Google around saying that is CVSS a risk score? No, it is not, right? I've seen people struggling because in their policy, somebody has written it saying that CVSS score greater than 8 should be remediated in 10 days. What if that vulnerability is there on 100 servers and out of those 100 servers, only 4 or 5 servers running business critical applications? Definitely, if I have a CVSS score greater than 8 on 100 servers and I have only 1 or 2 people to mitigate them, it's not realistic. First of all, CVSS score itself is not a risk score, right? So, and all identified vulnerabilities can be or should be mitigated. It's near impossible. You cannot, right? Let's be realistic. You cannot mitigate, or you should not be thinking that you should be mitigating all the vulnerabilities, right? These are extremely important foundational elements to have back of your mind to make a realistic attempt to mitigate these vulnerabilities. Let me quickly check. Okay, Mukul, probably this is not the forum where I can explain more on IT/OT gaps. We'll do some other time. Now coming back, let's move on, right? So why is that the vulnerability management programs are getting so complex, right? Now, if we peel these layers, we understand that there are 4 different fatigues, I would say, especially from challenges in the vulnerability management, right? So the first one being products or services fatigue, there is tools fatigue, there is alerts fatigue, there is process fatigue, right? I've carefully chosen the word fatigue because it's causing burnout for cybersecurity analysts because of these problems. Okay, so let's quickly see what these are, right? The first one, simply insane amount of applications are being used. The number of IT products and services being used to conduct the business are staggeringly high. Just look around in your own organization. How many SaaS applications are being used? Something for ERP, something for CRM, something for at CRMs itself, probably there are 2 or 3, something for identity management, gosh, right? And different type of operating systems, right? Somebody uses Windows, Linux, Mac, and I've not seen one good EDR that works on all the 3. That's a nightmare for the IT team to get a particular DLP solution or an EDR solution that works for all the 3. They end up buying 2 different products which do not talk to each other. Classic problem, right? Number of internal applications, thousands and thousands. If you are moderately larger organization, hundreds and thousands of internal applications, networking devices, numerous different types and makes, cloud services, numerous different cloud providers, databases, again, more than a dozen database types are being used, right? How do you even track the respective security advisories for that? Now, I'm trying to give you a realistic sense of what these challenges are, right? So that's when, as a community, probably we can aspire to build better solutions only once we identify the problems, right? So of course, the brighter thing in this particular aspect is that there is this standard called as CSAF, Cyber Security Advisory Framework, that is coming up to have a common way of publishing security advisories by different vendors. Probably you can look up a bit on CSAF. That's a good sign. That's a silver lining, so that it's easier to track the security advisories from multiple of these providers. Okay, that's the challenge number 1. The challenge number 2, tools fatigue. This is outright a derivative of your first challenge. Now you have numerous IT applications. Do we have scanners for that at all, right? you need application security scanners, you need cloud security posture scanners, you need container security posture scanners, CVE scanners, attack surface identification, OS misconfiguration, network misconfigurations, database misconfigurations, SaaS misconfigurations, and on top of it, people process vulnerabilities as well. Well, not really a scanner, but you need to still track it, right? Remember, you're going back to your policy, you have said that your vulnerability management policy caters not only to the technical vulnerabilities, but it should also cater to people and process-related vulnerabilities. Okay, now, how do you even track these respective scanner results? There are numerous of them. Not always we have army of experts who understand these reports of individual scanners, make sense out of them, try to fix them, and things like that. Extremely challenging, right? The addressing the tools fatigue, either you need to take a platform approach, either you can adopt an open source project such as Defect Dojo, which you can dump in all your scanner results and things like that, or you can build your own. I've seen many organizations build their own aggregation kind of a platform using Jira and such like, or you can buy a commercial products that unify everything. And again, a shameless plug here. That's one of my that's the company I co-founded, and we kind of build products around aggregating all these scanner results so that you don't end up building again a different aggregation. But of course, there are options available if you want to build on your own and such like, right? So that addresses the tools fatigue. Okay. Now, alerts fatigue. Now, what happens is that once you dump all these results into a platform of either you have built or you have used open source or you have bought a commercial product, is that the sheer number of alerts are extremely high. High number of alerts with low fidelity. They lack context, they lack correlation, they don't know whether the exploits are there, they lack a scientific ways of prioritizing the vulnerabilities itself. Like, right? So how do you identify risk? Again, go back to your my first statement saying that mere presence of a vulnerability doesn't really mean risk. You need to do all these things, like, so you need to contextualize it, you need to correlate it, you need to find exploits available, and then scientific ways to prioritize it, right? So that's when you identify the risk. Otherwise, you'll end up with tons and thousands of alerts coming from different scanners, but you have no way to go, right? So how do you do the contextualization? First thing, is this advisory relevant to my organization, or this malware or an attack going to impact my organization? If yes, then which vulnerability is mapping to that? Correlation, right? What type of threat does this vulnerability pose? What type of TTPs does this threat actor use to exploit this vulnerability? All you've seen in your vulnerability scanner is that there is a vulnerability, but what kind of do the threat actor needs to do a lateral movement to come to your Active Directory and exploit this vulnerability, or the threat actor should find another vulnerability to chain to get this, or whatever? What are those TTPs, right? And what type of mitigations you need to correlate again, so that should you push a policy to your IDS, or should you go back and write code, or should you ask the vendor to give a patch? What is the mitigation for that? So the correlation with all these data sources is extremely important, right? And extremely important is also that the prediction. Will somebody ever build an exploit, right? I've found a vulnerability, but what if there is no exploit? Then there is no threat. Then there is no threat. There is no risk, right? Can we forecast what kind of a threats emerge? So that's where the recent standard of EPSS, exploit prediction scoring system, is coming, but still it's not a prioritization metric. It is only a exploit prediction metric, right? So CVSS greater than some kind of a X value is not prioritization. EPSS greater than some kind of X value is not a prioritization again. But whereas a sum scoring mechanism, which will give you a threat into impact. So this is a foundational formula that you would have, I'm sure you would have read in many of the ISACA literature or otherwise, the risk assessments, that likelihood of a threat. I mean, to be more clear, risk is likelihood of a threat into impact, or function of likelihood of a threat's occurrence into impact, to be more clear, right? So in this regard, of course, we have released a tool recently. I mean, it's a free tool. You can just go ahead and probably type riskscore.info, play around this. That's one of such tools where you can do a risk-based scoring, not CVSS, CPSS, but it's a risk-based scoring that we have released, right? It's a free tool. You can go and play around that, right? So now coming back, yes. Now coming back, the next challenge, I have identified the vulnerabilities, I have contextualized them, I have prioritized them, I have found the risky vulnerabilities using all these scoring methodologies, but what next, right? Again, tying back in your policy, you would have identified who is accountable for it, who is analyzing them, who is fixing them, can we live with them, can we mark them as exceptions, is there a valid business case? So many times it comes that, hey, this Elasticsearch port is open to the internet, there's a valid business case because there's a proof of concept being done by a third-party vendor on this Elasticsearch. That's the reason why we can't block Elasticsearch port to the internet. There's a valid business reason, right? Maybe they want to live with it, right? Of course, we come into picture and say, no, put at least some kind of a safe listing, put some kind of authentication mechanism on your Elasticsearch and things like that. But that will ideally reduce your risk, mitigate it, but not remediate it, right? So identifying the vulnerabilities that you can live with, so-called exceptions, right? Now, who is tracking those exceptions? Okay, what are the timelines for those exceptions? Okay, you got an approval that this particular vulnerability need not be fixed for how long? Is it 2 weeks? Is it 3 months? What happens after 3 months, right? And how do you verify these fixes? Let's say a team, classic case, right? I mean, I'll tell you so many such examples. We have identified that, hey, there is no CAPTCHA enabled. It's quite obvious that there is some assessments that my team was doing, and they found that there is no CAPTCHA available, and the vendor took a shortcut. It's quite funny. In fact, after the login screen, he just put the CAPTCHA image and a dummy checkbox, but there's no CAPTCHA implemented assets. So you can just tick mark and bypass, or if you don't tick mark, you can bypass as. It's a dummy fix the vendor has come back with. So who is verifying these fixes again, right? So who is closing this loop, right? Remember again the goal. How do you de-risk your organization, right? So you need to identify, you need to make someone accountable, you need to track the exceptions, you need to get them fixed, you need to verify those fixes. That's when the full life cycle of de-risking completes. Okay. So how do you, I mean, there are some ways and methods and means we are kind of coming up with to automate this piece. So in that course, you could think of the traditional OODA loops, right? The observe, orient, decide, act kind of loops. There's a strong push for adopting these OODA loops in the threat hunting. If you are into the threat hunting and the SIEM, SOC monitoring kind of places, you would have heard that you need to implement these OODA loops in your SOAR kind of a technology. But I would suggest, in my honest opinion, your vulnerability identification comes at the identifying step, not at the detecting and remediate. Detect and remediate is where already the threat has happened. Like you have seen somebody attacking you, you have seen IDS logs having something, you have seen SOC monitoring giving you alerts that hey, something going wrong, right? It's too late in the cycle. So you need to shift left. I think there was one nice talk, or there is some nice talk going on in ISC2, where shift left is being talked about, and there's a lot of literature around, right? So what we are trying to, at least my humble approach to this problem is that you need to shift left this OODA loops as well for your risk remediation. The earlier in the life cycle you identify vulnerabilities, you kind of mitigate them or remediate them, it is cheaper both from a resources perspective and less damages than if the attack progresses to the later phases of the attack and then you kind of run your OODA loops, right? So building some kind of an automation here helps in remediating the risk faster and addressing this process fatigue. You need to build in automation as much as possible, right? So here is a reference architecture again to put everything together. Probably you need to build a platform, as I said, either use open source technologies that are out there, or build your own, or buy some product like ours or something like that, wherein you need to get all your scanner results from numerous asset types. You need to contextualize it, enrich it with the threat intel that is available, and then use some kind of a risk scoring that involves both the likelihood and the vulnerability score, and of course your impact scores, put everything together. That is exactly when you get more value for your efforts in your vulnerability management program. This is just a reference architecture on how we promote building your vulnerability management programs, right? So coming to the last leg, we have like what, half an hour more, I believe. I'll quickly bring these two resources and leave room for questions as well, because there are not many popping up. So again, going back to the initial discussion that we had, always ensure some metrics in place to measure your progress. That is when it gives you confidence that, hey, your vulnerability management program is working, and even gives confidence to your executives saying that, hey, they are getting results. Probably we can put in more attention and resources so that we can get better results. So it's always ensure that you have these metrics and improving the maturity over a period of time, right? Now, how do we do that? There are, of course, a lot of white papers and things like that. There's one good resource. I'll quickly open. The link is here, wherein I have actually opened that resource for you. So some of the key metrics, the ones that are related to vulnerability management, I would pick up. If you're doing any third-party risk management, then the average vendor security rating, and some ones I like say vulnerability remediations past your due date. I mean, this I know. I mean, this is hardly legible. Probably I'll try to zoom in, but this is a public resource. You can just Google around, and it's a SANS metrics, vulnerability maturity and metrics. So it's all available publicly. All the formulas as well given. You can build some kind of quick dashboards in Tableau, or simple Excels also will do, right? So what are the vulnerabilities that are past due date? What is the churn rate? What is the mean time to resolve? What is your reopen rate? These are all good metrics for tracking. What is the scanner coverage? Fundamentally, are we scanning enough, right? What is your patch age? What is your patch velocity? Well-defined metrics. These are like, how do you calculate them? Please go through that. I mean, in the interest of time, I'll not be going through the formulae and how to build it and things like that. It's a free resource. These are some of the metrics that will help you, right? The moment you show that, hey, I've put together a simple vulnerability management policy, I'm implementing it. In this quarter, my scanner coverage is 10%. That's okay. I still can measure that it is 10%. 10% of my assets are under coverage. Probably in the next quarter or the next 2 quarters, I'll get this coverage to 30%, 40%, 50%, right? Or it could be my remediation efforts. My team is working hard. The mean time to detect is, mean time to remediate is probably 20 days. But if only I can add a few more resources, I can further bring down the mean time to remediate, right? That's a proper data on table. Even if you want to go to your management and say, hey, I need to hire 2 people. With these 2 people, I'll try to bring down my scanner coverage, improve my scanner coverage, or bring down my mean time to remediate, right? Having data-backed decisions always will help you to mature your program, right? So these are some of those metrics. There are other metrics as well. You can go through that. This is a good resource I found. Now, how do you improve your overall program itself, right? So that's where the vulnerability maturity model helps. This is one such model that is there. It is very similar to your CMMI capability maturity model things, where at each level, right, you are preparing, you are identifying the vulnerabilities, you are analyzing, you are communicating the metrics and reporting, you're treating them on all these facets of that we have discussed, and going deeper as well. What level you are you at an initial level? Are you at a level 2, level 3, level 4, and highest is level 5, right? So it's very simple. I mean, probably I'll put together an Excel. I was working on building a simple Excel where you can just mark them where you are, and you have a maturity metric saying that, hey, we are just starting off. We are at a maturity level, probably 5 out of 10 or something. At the end of the year, we can get to the maturity level of 5, right? or a score of 5 out of 10 now, but or whatever, right? 50 out of 100, but in the 1 year, I'm going to get you 90 out of 100. So measurable, actionable, measurable maturity models always help. And I've seen fantastic results for many of our customers. There are maturity models for overall cybersecurity assessments. There are maturity models for SOC alone. There are maturity models for vulnerability management as well. So this is one such maturity model. Again, just Google around SANS vulnerability maturity model. You'll be able to get this resource easily. Okay. So that brings my talk to an end. Thank you so much for giving this opportunity. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer these questions. Questions, thoughts, feedback, right? We'll be more than glad to answer. That's a very good, I think, 134 participation. Really glad Isaka team for organizing this.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Sashank. If there are any more questions, we could probably pick it up. I see a couple of them on the Q&A window. Maybe in case you have not picked up, you could probably just have a look into it.
Yeah. So probably I'll take the Q&A window and answer some of them. If a contractor says vendor does not fix its own, if a contract says vendor does not fix its own vulnerabilities, might they be offering a separate support contract to deal with those? Yes, why not? You can check. Does one check that if they do not fix vulnerabilities, do they offer an upgrade? Otherwise, one goes to another supplier. Yeah, it's totally up to you and the contractor. In our case, in the scenario which I have mentioned, the contractor outright said that, hey, I don't have expertise of security. Please go with someone. Right? So, or there could be a contractor who says, I will give you the source code, I'll give you the uptime, I'll ensure the security as well within this SLA, right? That could be one of your metric to choose your suppliers as well, right? In your vendor qualification criteria. And you said can you place the link for the document? Yes, I'll put you just Google around for this resource called as security compliance framework, which is an excellent resource for all the controls and all the mappings and things like that. Just Google around for that. And what is the name of the resource that you have mentioned? I think I just answered that. What is the strategy? What strategy is the best for remediation of cloud container vulnerability, right? So it again depends upon, because the cloud container vulnerability, it has its own manifests of it. Is it the container image level? Is it the container platform level? Is it the container operational level? Again, the mantra is shift left. Ensure that the container image building itself, you don't have vulnerabilities, or you minimize the number of vulnerabilities. Your container setup itself, the management plane and the control plane has lesser configuration issues and such like. So always the mantra is shift left and do. That gives you better results. Verification of fixes, is that an example of assurance? Assurance I've seen, again, I mean, going with dictionary definitions and going with practical usage of the terms. So what I've seen is that verification and validation I've seen with the fixes, but not the term assurance itself. I've seen the term assurance in the circles where you are assuring that the controls are functioning as expected, right? So it's like controls testing. You're testing a firewall, is it working as expected, or you're testing a IDS, or you're testing an MFA and then assure that these controls are working as expected. I've seen the uses of the term assurance in that context, but in the context of remediation, I've seen verification, validation, and bringing the risk down, this kind of a jargon, right? And there is another question, main challenge for many enterprises are remediation of non-Microsoft vulnerabilities and business application vulnerabilities. What is the right approach you recommend? That's a loaded statement, I would say, because Microsoft being Microsoft, probably they're releasing the patches more often, especially when you are using non-Microsoft, which means probably open source kind of a thing. Be very wary of at least consider some kind of a support from some vendor who can help you with that. So the choice of technologies that you're using for your business applications itself will determine the risk involved. So probably you can choose the Linux flavors, if that's what you meant, where there is someone providing you support to patch them of sort, or at least the solutions that you are choosing. In the case of, I've mentioned that, hey, there is no EDR for, there is no good EDR for a Linux or some kind of a Linux desktop that you're using. So be very wary of offering that. If your IT team is offering that we'll support these kind of applications, make sure that your controls also work on it, right? And business application vulnerabilities, again, the right way is to shift left, ensure that the WASP, ASVS kind of a standards you use to audit your business application vulnerabilities, ensure static analysis, dynamic analysis, and all those good practices are followed right from the beginning to ensure you get better results, right? Okay, I don't know if that was a question. I don't want to answer. What is expected action on priority of rated controls based on design and performances? Is there any guidance on how to identify risk for controls? I'm not sure I follow your question right, because you're using the term risk and controls in the same statement, which is what I was trying to say, that absence of control is not necessarily risk, right? But if your question is in testing or identifying the controls, again, as I said, I don't really follow the question itself to answer. Next, the monthly scan report that is published by risk management team, we see an increasing trend in the new vulnerabilities every month. Your advice on this? Yes, unfortunately or fortunately, that's a situation we are in right now. I don't have an answer because, as I said, the complexity in the IT environments is high. That's the reason the number of vulnerabilities are high. At the same time, you can't be a showstopper saying that you can't say that, hey, do not use Linux desktops because they have more vulnerabilities. I'm just saying, making it up, right? You're stopping the business. The development team may come back and say, I need to use Ubuntu such and such version because of I need to develop the product, right? So the vulnerabilities always will be on the rise, but do not panic. That's the myths that we have covered, that you need to contextualize these vulnerabilities. You need to prioritize these vulnerabilities. And then the risky vulnerabilities are the ones that you need to be worrying about. So don't worry really about the trend of new vulnerabilities coming, but worry about the risk that is coming from the vulnerabilities, right? What is the best cost-effective way to manage risk to business due to ever-growing security vulnerabilities? Again, cost-effective way, I've seen people using spreadsheets, the cheapest way, but that you need a lot of expertise into build those, managing your risk registers in Excel sheets without missing too much. And of course, you can go to the other extreme of getting a fancy, costly GRC management tools. And there's this huge spectrum in between. So, I mean, I don't know if I can make any commercial recommendations here, but then you can Google around for open source risk management tools as well. I mean, if that's cost effective is what you mean. What is the best practice timelines for vulnerability remediation? Extremely contextual, as I think probably I've covered in depth on how do you maintain your SLAs based on different types of assets. If it's a web application, then there might be development coding involved, or sometimes it could be a simple WAF rule that you may need to configure, right? So it's very contextual. There is no offhand answer. I've seen critical 5 days, high 15 days types as well, but it may be or may not be applicable in your environment, right? So it's contextual, I would say. So super. So any further questions? We have like what, 20 more minutes. Please keep them coming. I'll be more than happy to answer. Okay. Any further? I know it's Saturday evening. I'm fully charged up for more questions as well. Why do we give so much priority to critical vulnerability? Because the threat is high. And again, critical vulnerability is not based on CVS score or EPS score. So you can, sorry, I don't know. What did I do? I'll answer this. Why vulnerability is not a risk? I think I have answered that. Let me type in this free resource I have mentioned, riskscore.info, play around that to play around why a particular CVS score and how to contextualize it and how to get to the risk score and things like that. So play around this particular one, right? Any other? Okay, on cyber risk, showing CIS 20 missing control is a risk or just a report. Let's say someone built this for enterprise assets, including SaaS assets used to host. Okay, so translate. So don't just go by CIS top 20 and say, hey, you're not doing this, so it is risk. Probably rewatch this talk. I've been emphasizing on it. Absence of a control is not a risk. So you need to see from the lens of why a particular control is needed in your organization, right? And then probably if CIS control says that, hey, remote working, VPN needs to be deployed, but you may say that my organization doesn't even have a remote working policy, then outright that's not a risk, right? I mean, by policy, you don't allow your employees to work from home, then there is no point of deploying a VPN, right? So what are the worst mistakes that organizations can do in managing their vulnerability management programs? Anup, I love this question. The simple answer is please rewatch this entire session. So I've been, explaining all these issues, the myths and best practices and things like that. I would love if you rewatch this. I'm sure, I think this will be made available on YouTube or somewhere, right? Or the recording at least, right? So please go through what one should do if there is a zero-day vulnerability that the big corporations are not aware and there's an attack as a consumer of the product. Do I have any legal rights? Probably I would refrain myself from a legal rights perspective. I'm not a lawyer, but I think, yesterday or so, there is a government directive coming that the OEMs are liable for the technology that they roll out. Biden government rolled out something. Again, as I said, I'm not a lawyer, but from a measures perspective, always have defense in depth because the zero-day one, when the Log4j happened, what saved many organizations from that getting exploited is the defense in depth. For example, they had a policy of outbound internet not applicable for critical resources. So even when Log4j vulnerability was there was no way to connect to a remote AD server, so they were safe. So always have defense in depth. Rachna says it's really interesting perspective. Most people just reporting missing controls. That's the fight. That's the good fight we are doing as well. Please do not scare people that you don't have a control. Please contextualize them and identify the risk. Right? Is SOAR tool a wise option? Definitely. But the way the SOAR tools are evolving is, again, the OODA loops slide, if you remember, they're being used more in the threat phase. For example, if you have seen bad IP address, the SOAR tool will help you to block it by pushing a rule to a firewall. Whereas if you use the SOAR tool to automate, for example, your web scan result has identified a vulnerability in a JavaScript library, then configure your SOAR tool such that it pushes a policy to your WAF. That is shifting left. So that's a fantastic question. I would say the SOAR should evolve to ROAR, I would say, risk operations and orchestration, rather than security operations, which happens in the later phases of the attack. More questions coming in. I'm just loving this. Will the definition of risk still hold good as it's in case of privacy, as in case of threat actor, not a regulation? Yes, right. Compliance risk is a risk. If you're not adhering to the state of law of the state, then it is a risk, no matter what. If the law says that you have to do this, you have to do this, period. That's it. That's a risk, right? You may be out of business. You may lose your licenses. That is a risk, right? So it is a risk. You need to realign that, right? Probably if you don't have a data classification step, you can tie it back to saying that whatever privacy law says that you need to do data classification to identify PII and PHI and stuff like that. So you can tie it back to that. That's the reason why I've mentioned in your vulnerability management policy, you need to identify which of those compliance or regulatory things that you are violating as well. That helps, right? What is the right approach to integrate vulnerability management program into DevSecOps program? That's a fantastic question again. So at every stage of your DevSecOps, right, your static analysis, your dynamic analysis, your manual PT results, your security operations, everything can be dumped into the reference architecture I have mentioned, where you need to prioritize this, right? I can guarantee that any of the security static analysis results that I've done, no developer of late will agree that this is a vulnerability because there is no context, right? So you may not get results. Only when you contextualize that and prioritize it and all the things that I've mentioned, that's when you will get better results. Can you discuss about SDOS attack from the perspective of a zombie organization? I'm really sorry, my friend, I don't know what SDOS is. Do you mean the DDoS? From a zombie organization, you mean an organization that doesn't exist? I don't know what the question means. If you are a CISO for a day of an unknown company, how will you build a risk register? So that's a fantastic question. I've been CISO for many, many days and many, many years, but given one day, it's highly challenging because the day goes off. Actually, that's in fact a good question, Rachna. Please Google around for my talk, A Day in Life of CISO, where I have mentioned, that's one with Vandana Verma, where I've mentioned what are your first 30 days, what are your 60 days, 90 days plan. But one day is too short. By the time I talk to the teams itself, you run out of time, right? But there's a good talk I have made on that. How do we identify supply chain vulnerabilities and integrate into enterprise vulnerability management program? It's a fantastic question. Again, so supply chain itself, right? It depends whether, as simple as whether you are addressing your GitHub depend about vulnerabilities is a supply chain issue, or you are rolling out a holistic, mature supply chain security issue. But again, any scanner resulting into vulnerabilities, whether supply chain vulnerabilities or not, do not panic. You need to properly go through all the steps of contextualization, prioritization, and then filter out the risky ones. That's when you're going to get better results in your vulnerability management program. I often see the longer people get, the complicated risk registers come out. They're so complex that it's a puzzle in some companies. I do agree that the risk registers are quite complex, non-actionable sometimes. But then that's the challenge. We as a community should try to decipher by building simpler tools. Why client want us to scan using multiple tools as we get the same result? Multiple tools because not a single tool does a good job. So you need a step called deduplication in order to filter down the duplicates, but you still need multiple tools because one tool maybe for your application vulnerabilities, another tool you may need for your SSL vulnerabilities, another tool you may need for your CVE findings. So there is no one tool that does a good job. That's the reason why you need to run multiple tools, and there is almost always overlaps. So you need to do a deduplication step. Okay, what is the best method to ascertain and validate and confirm false positives? The litmus test for confirming any false positive is to construct a proof of concept, right? If there's a proof of concept, I found a vulnerability, I as a security analyst build a proof of concept, that's the litmus test, right? And you can run the same proof of concept after the fix is done as well to ensure that there is no vulnerability anymore, right? Otherwise, it's less likely, it may not be a false positive, but it's less likely to cause any risky. So always try to use this building proof of concept, right? Some examples of supply chain vulnerabilities. I know there is a lot of noise around supply chain vulnerabilities. To break it down, a simple way is that if you're writing code and you're using multiple packages, right? It could be Node.js packages, it could be Java packages, it could be whatever third-party libraries that you're using, and those third-party libraries having vulnerabilities. That's a simplistic term for saying that supply chain vulnerabilities, which you may have to from time to time evaluate whether these third-party libraries using in your code are need any upgrade and patches and such like, right? That's a simplistic answer. Okay. Any further? How to emphasize and prioritize vulnerability management program in any organization? That's a fantastic question. Again, please rewatch my talk. The first phases when we're trying to put together a policy itself, right? I discussed some of the do's and don'ts. Segregation of duties between IT and security to build cyber resilience in an organization. What your take on this? Absolutely, right? I mean, the RESI matrix which I was talking about, it's nothing but your segregation of duties. But again, depends upon how big organization you are and what kind of resources you have. Do you have a separate IT and security team? What is part of a policy? What is and when the policy approval is being done, whether the IT head and the security head are consulted in order to approve that policy. That's where it starts, and then it gets rolled out. So it depends on organization to organization, but building a proper RESI matrix is always useful. Okay, so there are no further questions.
Yep, looks like a very, very engaging 90 plus minutes. Thank you, Sashank, for giving us a lot of insights onto, moving the vulnerability management from a paper of a policy, which is there in most of the organizations, which probably, is written 3-4 years back and, last reviewed on some basis, right? To an update in terms of how you could manage it, how you could define matrices, how you could look into, the various elements. So I think really appreciate your time. I think there's just one more question and probably we'll stop it after that. Tarun has probably, brought up another question. Let's quickly take that.
Yeah. US national cybersecurity strategy is proposing to shift the responsibility. I think this is what I was talking about. This is what I was talking about, saying that the Biden government makes the OEMs responsible for that. It will take time, but somebody should be held responsible for that. See, the geopolitical issues are another angle, right? I mean, the sense that what if you use a product built in a different country, but you are using in this country, whether the jurisdiction is applied or not. So these kind of legal challenges might come in. But again, we need to see how it really plays out. But it's at least a good move, I would say, that somebody should be accountable for that. Would be my short answer. Role of CMDB in vulnerability management. It's a fantastic question. As they say, if you don't know what your assets are, you don't know what your risks are, right? So CMDB plays a very, very important role. That's where your asset context that's coming in to prioritize your vulnerabilities, right? A well-maintained CMDB is also a tough problem on its own, but still CMDB in any form is a good start to contextualize and prioritize your vulnerabilities. So that plays a very key and important role. How can we minimize the risk when we have open vulnerability for a long time? And also we cannot close the risk for another 1 month due to lack of downtime. So I think when the moment there's a risk of a vulnerability, right, always think of ways to mitigate, not only to remediate, right? Remediation could be the ultimate thing. Let's say, let's go fix this bug, but let's go patch the server in your case, right? But it may not be realistic. Probably, as you said, there is no downtime for 1 more month. How can you even attach that? That is remediation. But look at mitigation, right? How do you mitigate? Maybe there is I'll tell you a classic case. Let's take the same Log4j vulnerability, right? It's so critical that you need to patch, but you don't have a downtime for 1 month for whatever business reasons, right? But you can monitor for it. You can, because the IOCs and the signatures are well written, probably you can write those Yara signatures or whatever the SOC technology that you're using and emphasize or apprise your SOC team saying that please monitor for these traces, because you're actually mitigating that, not really eliminating that, right? So for each of those vulnerability, you need to see what those parameters are to watch out for. Are there any ways to mitigate that risk by emphasizing more monitoring or emphasizing alternative controls and things like that when patching itself is not feasible? Okay.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of this very, very interesting, close to about 2 hours of discussion, probably a few minutes short of 2 hours. So a lot of knowledge shared in the last, 90 to 100 odd minutes. A lot of practical cases, nuances have been discussed. So I think on behalf of ISACA Bangalore chapter, the least which I could do is, give a big round of applause virtually. And, thank you so much, Sashank. I think a lot of practical inputs, and, we're looking forward to hear you some other time. Thank you so much. And to the audience, I think it's been a real pleasure. We had about 150, I think, around the peak time, and about close to about 120 are still on intact. So I think kudos to all of you. As always, please follow us on LinkedIn. Please follow us on YouTube and Telegram. We have a lot of information which we are sharing. And just another update: the ISACA Bangalore chapter, as all of you are aware, the new premises is almost. We have registered it. The premises, the interiors work is going on. I think probably shortly you should get an intimation on the next steps. But while that is taking place, on the next Saturday, we have an event scheduled at Chancery Pavilion. This is on a full day event specifically focusing on Women's Day, and of course this is open for all, not just the women members. It's open for all. I think you will be able to see my screen where you have these details. Interestingly, we thought we'll do something a little different. Some sessions on wellness, sessions on handwriting analogy, as well as technical and panel discussion. It's one of its kind. We are trying to bring something new and different from the ISACA Bangalore chapter. Hoping to see you soon in that particular event. And thank you so much for being a wonderful audience. I think we are coming to the end of the session. Shashank's details are, of course, available, and you could reach out in case you have any specific questions. Thank you so much. Take care. Have a great weekend ahead.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy your rest of your weekend and stay safe. Yeah. Bye.